Hey there. Remember last time when we saw those amazing celebrations with all the bright lights in the sky? Well, today, we're going to be history detectives and find out the real story behind them.
To answer this really great question, we need to hop in our imaginary time machine. We're going to go way, way back to a time before the United States was even a country. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, so picture this. A long, long time ago, there wasn't a country called the United States. Instead, there were 13 big areas of land called colonies, and they all belonged to a country far across the ocean called Great Britain. This meant a king was their ruler, even though he lived very, very far away.
Now, for a little while, everything was mostly fine, but then a really big problem started to pop up. And like so many problems, this one was about money. Let's take a closer look at why the people living in the colonies started to get so upset.
Think about it like this. Imagine you get your allowance, and then someone just comes along and takes some of it without even asking you first. How would that make you feel? Probably pretty angry, right? Well, that is exactly how the people in the colonies felt. It just wasn't fair.
This big, unfair feeling got so strong that it was given a special name. And this is a super important phrase to remember, so let's listen carefully. It was called taxation without representation. Let's try saying it together. Taxation without representation.
This big phrase is actually pretty simple when you break it down. It has two parts. The first part is taxation. That's just a word for paying money, called taxes, to the government. Easy, right? But the second part was the real problem. No representation. This meant the colonists had no voice. They couldn't vote for leaders to speak for them in the British government. So they had to pay all this money, but they had absolutely no say in how it was spent.
And the king didn't just stop at one tax, oh no. Great Britain started passing more and more new laws, and each new law just made the colonists feel more ignored and more angry. So let's look at some of these unfair laws. First, way back in 1765, there was the Stamp Act. All of a sudden, people had to pay extra for every single piece of paper they used. Newspapers, documents, you name it. A few years later came the Townshend Acts, which put taxes on things like glass and paint. Then came the very famous Tea Act. Now, people back then loved drinking tea, but they really hated this new tax. And finally, when the colonists protested, the king punished them with the Intolerable Acts. That word, intolerable, means something is so bad you just can't stand it. And these laws took away a lot of their freedoms.
That Tea Act made people so furious that they decided to do something really big and dramatic. In a city called Boston, a group of colonists snuck onto the British ships in the middle of the night and, splash, they threw all the tea right into the ocean. This famous protest is called the Boston Tea Party.
After the Boston Tea Party, things got much more serious. The king was really angry, and the colonists were even angrier. The frustration was just too high, and talking wasn't enough anymore. Sadly, all the arguing started to turn into actual fighting. This timeline shows how things kept getting worse. In 1770, a fight in the street between colonists and soldiers turned violent, and it was called the Boston Massacre. Then, as we know, the king punished Boston with those awful, intolerable acts. And finally, in 1775, in two small towns called Lexington and Concord, the first real battles of a war began. The time for just talking was over.
With fighting in the streets, the leaders from all 13 colonies knew they couldn't just go back to how things were. So they all came together for a big meeting called the Continental Congress. They had to decide, together, what to do about their huge problems with the king.
So, after all the unfair taxes, all the protests, and now the start of a war, the leaders made a very brave, very final decision. They decided it was time to separate.
Okay, this slide is your super important study guide. Let's review everything one more time, nice and slow. The main problem was taxation without representation. Some key laws to remember are the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and the Intolerable Acts. The big events that showed how angry people were, the Boston Tea Party and the first battles. And what did it all lead to? What was the final result? The colonies decided it was time to leave Great Britain and become their very own country.
So, they made their choice. They wanted to be free. But that leads us to one last, really exciting question. How do you tell a powerful king that you're quitting? Well, you write him a letter. And in our next lesson, we are going to learn all about the most famous breakup letter in history. the Declaration of Independence. You did an amazing job today. I'll see you next time.